Okay, let's because this is an anger thing too, right? Because I
Yeah,
honestly think that a lot of cases of depression and other mental health conditions in men are missed because of the
agreed.
myth of the angry man,
Yeah.
right? And I see the language on these boards, and I find it's really difficult for me because it triggers an instinct in me of you are small and pathetic. We know there's a side of me that's a little bit Thor, like a little bit barbarian, right? Working with Sagas made me realize that I do have that bonk things on the head impulse. And there's just when someone is wailing like that, there's this primal response of, will you just fucking center? Like it's so hard to find words for what I'm feeling that aren't sexist and gendered, right? But
Yeah.
it's just and I can't control it. It is so strong when and it isn't that it's like that. It's not a female instinct. It's not a feminine urge. It's that you are not chivalrous. You are spineless. I don't care what happened to you. You don't behave that way.
Mhm.
Strength is not something that's just handed to you. It's something you develop and something you earn. And
Well,
are you listening to yourself?
yeah, it's like I don't remember which series it was we talked about it, but there was a point where we said someone who is an alpha male doesn't have to keep saying
Yeah.
they're an alpha male.
And
And, you know, some of these manosphere guys, they're like, oh, well, women, they try to argue it's like, oh, if women don't like him, it's because you haven't actually listened to what they said. And it's like, I have listened. I didn't like what he had to say. If you, if this person wasn't sexist and if what he said was okay, then there wouldn't be this issue. And why are you not listening to when women are saying, because it's always like, oh, if they don't agree with it, they're just feminist.
well, and so
No.
what? Does that doesn't automatically make them wrong?
Yeah, I saw someone I kind of know who commented on something on Facebook saying, "Oh, well, 90% of divorces are initiated by women, thanks feminism." And I just wanted to grab his head and be like, you can't just dismiss things
No, you
with
can't.
trigger words. You cannot you cannot say it's just this thing. Like, you cannot blame feminism and say feminism is bad if some women are actually finally able to speak up. Do I like everything feminism says? No, but there's a reason it resonates with people. And if
Sure.
you're just going to dismiss it, then women are not going to like you and they're not going to listen to what you have to say because you're not doing them the same courtesy.
Well, I had an actual decent conversation with a guy who works with male survivors of abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And he was going on about, the manosphere. I don't agree with them, but I understand radical feminism drives them to this. They're broken people, they're isolated, they're lonely. And I said, first of all, they don't start off as isolated as they as
Become.
they and I said, you are blaming radical feminism, which was a reaction to, the patriarchy of the past, that these were broken people too. And he said, you know what? You're right. I didn't consider that. It's a cycle.
Exactly. And one thing about the manosphere and the way they rage, and again, I'm taking this from something the Authentic Observer said, but these men, they blame feminism
Yeah.
and radical feminism especially, but they also use the exact same
Oh,
methods
yeah.
that radical feminism uses.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, stop for a second and think, did getting screamed at that you're sexist and you're wrong just because you're a man, did that change your mind?
Right. Well,
Because
maybe it
there's
did.
absolute I I mean, it just drove them to where they are now.
Yeah. I mean, I,
And
I don't think it's feminism that has driven these guys. I think it's neglect
No, but
in
I
their
do think
immediate circle. Like feminism's an easy thing to blame, and you know what? The I think the constant drumbeat of messaging that you're a man and therefore you're automatic scum, that can do something to somebody.
yeah, and that's why I clarify it's the
Yeah.
radical, and it is that black pill, you're a man,
You
you're the
know what?
problem
I've
thing.
been thinking about this lately, and I wonder if it's less because I remember I hate bridal showers, baby showers,
Mhm.
female spaces, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I've never liked is the male bashing that goes on in those spaces. And I really wonder if the damage being done to these guys is feminism. Because let's face it, they're not going to encounter that until they're in college.
Mhm.
All the early life damage has been done. I'm wondering if
Yes.
it's the drunk ass wine mom and wine auntie going on about how shit men are.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And
I
that's a
believe
different
so.
thing. That's more kind of gilded cage, blaming men for the fact that they can't get pissed off, mad as hell, not going to take it anymore, rip that amulet off and go, no, I want a life. I want something outside the home. I want things. And I
Mhm.
do think that there's a real and sensitive point time. I do think a lot of the damage that happens is people's own mothers.
Yes.
And especially when we're kids who are very different from our mothers.
Mhm.
It's not the mom's fault in a lot of cases, especially, when you have a kid like me who, all the stuff that I was into didn't exist 5 years before I got into it. It's this completely different world. There's a lot of damn pressure
Mhm.
on moms. I really, really sympathize. And there's a difference between a mom who tried her best and made some mistakes, and then somebody who is just miserable and passing that on to their children.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was pitching this series, it was a female answer to the Big Bang Theory. So it's a show
Yeah.
about four woman nerds. And the central character had a very fraught relationship with her mother, and her mother was very passive aggressive and the digs, the nags, and a hallmark of their relationship was the mother would ask, how are you, darling, when she went to see her daughter, and the daughter was always going, I'm in late stage kidney failure, mom, or I'm breathing ketones and slowly dying from diabetes. And that's nice, walks into the apartment, right? Like the mom's not listening. She's just following a script. I think that kind of stuff, what we used to call the Valium moms
Mhm.
of the 60s and 70s, now it's the wine moms, or the self-help ones who don't want to put anything in their bodies and all natural and won't get the COVID vaccine because it's artificial. I think that is the real damage in these guys. Not because developmentally, you're too far along to have that much core trauma by the time you get into college. That stuff hits early life. Those central stories you tell about yourself,
Mhm.
that's 8 to 12 years old that it hits boys that way. There's a limited number of sources that can come from. And the reason I talk about this and eat all the shit about this is because if we diagnose the problem wrong, we get the wrong solution. It's the same way it's real easy when women are angry to blame men.
Mhm.
Uh, and too much that happens, I admit. But the truth is that often that's just displacement from the people they're really angry at, which is, let's face it, a lot of the time, other women. There is this unspoken competitiveness between women that used to make sense, right? Because boys were desirable, women couldn't own property. So the best thing to do is marry well, which means get really competitive over men. And even though those drivers aren't there anymore, the instincts, the urges, the traditions still remain. Right. And
Yeah.
I do think, again, When do women get traumatized? 7th and 8th grade. Who does it? Usually other women, right? Other girls.
Oh yeah.
We know this. And that, I mean, and I remember reading a ton of stuff. Rachel Simmons, Odd Girl Out. I highly recommend that book because it talks about the fact that girls in the 8th grade, that was particularly what she studied, believed that adults getting involved in conflicts made them worse, and that many women grew up with a deep distrust of other women because when they tried to talk about what was happening to them, they were invalidated and silenced. And she talks about the way conflict between girls is dismissed as drama.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a word that's sort of crept into all our vocabularies. Oh, the drama.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and Rachel Simmons pointed out that choice of words, it's minimizing, right? That's why I said conflict, not drama. It's a conflict,
Mm-hmm.
right? A drama is, damn it, you fool. Can't you see we're dying? Flounce, right? A legitimate pain isn't drama, right?
Yeah.
And not all conflict has to be dramatic. But the minute we start calling it the drama instead of, no, this is legitimate, it does something to people. It does something to what people think they can ask for and how much agency they have over their own lives. And the more everything has been standardized to what we call alternate aggressions, and this is what I was getting at when I brought up the zero tolerance stuff before.
Mm-hmm.
Boys' methods of conflict resolution have become more like girls. And the problem with that is it's harder to spot who the actual aggressor is. It's harder to see the damage. It happens behind closed doors where adults can't intervene. And then when adults do intervene, they completely screw it up.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is they just wanted to go, that whole thing about helicopter parents, and they march their kids down. And it's like you said, they sit them down and they make them hug it out and all that stuff. They don't allow young people to, supervise, mediate, but don't solve it for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because every time somebody gets involved and takes away, you're making them feel like they can't do it themselves. And they have to learn. And they don't. And so then I read somewhere where, because, you get all these statistics about who has it worse, boys or girls. And have you seen any of this stuff?
A little, yeah.
Like girls, Gen Z girls have a 25% rate of depression.
Oh yeah.
By
Yeah,
adolescence. That. By boys, it's 9. But then the counter statistic from the manosphere is that 82% of boys graduate high school, whereas 88% of girls graduate high school. So schools failing boys, and I'm like, a 6% differential is not, a 16% differential.
I personally, I think our school system is awful.
Oh, I think it fails everybody.
Yeah, it fails everybody.
It fails everybody. It's all about what's cheap and what's going to appease certain bean counters, not what actually works in terms of education, and teachers are less and less empowered. But the whole thing is this competition about who has it worse. It's not advocacy, it's a giant victim complex.
Yeah.
Like there are challenges facing men. There are challenges facing women. And just because a song or a show or something wants to take time to focus on one does not mean it's invalidating your personal pain. And the freaking out that happens over media because people have been taught to make it an us versus them thing.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead. Sorry.
I think that's something that does start in childhood.
Oh, it does.
Every time we separate a class, boys versus girls.
Yeah.
And even if it's just like a fun little game, you're still teaching them something. Like there is always going to be a level of tribalism.
Yeah, you're assigning meaning.
Adults, exactly.
Yeah, you're assigning meaning to the difference.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm saying, don't tell me it's just about adult human male, adult human female. No, from the time kids are like 4 years old, it's pink for girls, blue for boys. It starts
Mhm.
even younger now. Cause I mean, when I was a kid, it was the 70s. Everything was gender neutral.
What's interesting because like even and then pink is villainized. I mean,
Yeah.
just this idea that like I remember it took me years to admit I liked pink again
Hmm.
because I didn't want to be weak. And there was also a long time where I was like, I don't want to be girly. I know, shock.
Yeah.
Like, because that wasn't strong.
Right.
And I couldn't be because of my situation. And embrace it was really only in the last year or so that I did where it's like, no, I like pink. It makes me happy. I like frilly
Mhm.
girly things. And
And I like you said, this idea that femininity, the values assigned to femininity, and why I do think it's important that people look into the sacred feminine and what it really is,
Mhm.
and how complicated it is. And unfortunately, it's hard to find how do I put this? Non-commodified
Yeah.
versions of the sacred feminine, uh because there are a lot of different ones, but it isn't weakness. It's the only way I can describe it is a D&D metaphor, because even if you say passive,
Mhm.
it's not passive, right? It's
No,
not weak, it's not necessarily comforting. The divine is never comforting.
no.
It's always sublime and sort of terrifying. What it is it's the difference between a fighter class in Dungeons and Dragons and the rogue class. It's the difference between the priest, the cleric class, and the
Mhm.
mage class. It is wisdom, it is dexterity, it is maneuverability. And that wisdom element, because of some of the things that happened, sorry, with patriarchy, that's the stuff that got stripped out of the popular consciousness of the sacred feminine. And
Mhm.
you can scream that I dropped the P word, guys, all you want. That's just history. It was deliberately stripped out because they didn't want women getting any damn fool ideas.
Yep.
But it's definitely there, that idea. And it's funny because what's remained is this idea that women just know how to be mothers.
Oh God. You know, there's a scene in The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel,
Yeah.
and I'm sure we'll talk about that show another time. But where she's on stage doing a comedy sketch, and she holds up that Dr. Spock book that was
Right.
huge
Oh
in the
yeah, that was
50s
the
and
first
60s.
season, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and she says, I've been trying to read this, but it says you'll just know. What if I don't just
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And that's such a big thing. It's like, look, if you don't want to be a parent, don't be a parent, and don't let anyone force you into it, please.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's also there's this mix of, I've met women who were not even just more holistic, but who were like, yeah, I'm a woman, I have kids. That's, in this particular case, it's like that's my God-given gift,
Hmm.
is that I can produce kids. And the women who see childbirth as natural are the ones who are less likely to be traumatized by it.
Hmm.
Whereas there is this, and I'm not saying it always goes smoothly,
No.
but the women who do view it, they're the ones who are usually like, yeah, it hurt, but it was okay. And I'm fine. And look, I have my baby. Whereas there is this other mentality where it's like, oh, it's something that's forced on women. It's awful. It's
Yeah, the
traumatic.
Handmaid's Tale attitude.
It's the Handmaid's Tale attitude. And it's like, oh my God, it's the most traumatizing thing that ever happened to me. And I'm like, okay, is it painful? Is it a big deal? Yes. But I notice that there is a big difference in the attitude you go into it with.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's
And
it's also, I mean, my mother actually had a moment where she really objected to the traditional screaming delivery room scene in media.
yeah,
And one day she just said, "Oh my God, it's not that bad."
yeah. And I've talked to women who they're like, yeah, it's awful, but you forget about it the moment you hold your baby.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there is that. If I think it is important to get away from this idea of, oh, the baby is just a, oh God, what's the word? Uh, Not a virus. What's that?
Parasite.
Parasite thing.
Yeah.
Your baby is not just a parasite that is leeching energy from you.
Well, if
This is
that's the people who think that shouldn't have kids. I mean,
exactly.
I'm not the biggest baby person, and I realize it's actually not the babies. I quite like babies. It's their parents I can't stand. Because I can't handle precious parents.
And a lot of what I see of people who say they don't like kids, it's really just you don't like the way some parents allow their kids to behave.
Oh no, it's more that they use parenthood as a weapon in a way.
Yeah.
That whole, do you have children? And it's like, why is that relevant to data?
Yeah, no, I had a coworker once who she would tell me, well, you're not a parent, so you don't get to judge how people parent their kids. And I'm sitting here going, I am a member of society. I get to judge the parent who drags their screaming toddler all around the craft store and lets them torment everyone else.
And I understand a certain amount of empathy for the fact that parents end up at the end of their rope and there
Absolutely.
are not fine moments in parenting.
Of course.
There was a moment recently where somebody, I don't remember if they're planning kids or they're expecting a kid, but it was sort of, I'm afraid I'm going to screw up my kids, and everyone in the room went, everybody screws up their kids somehow. It's a question of how bad, and just set an example of apologizing to your kid when you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That's it, right? But it's 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 a thing, right? We have so well, I mean, we have made motherhood a position of weakness too, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's because one, we don't see it as work that deserves to be compensated. And if a society
Yeah.
wants babies, the society has to do what it does for everything else. They have to have the conditions where it is feasible for people to have babies,
Yeah.
right? But also, if motherhood means, and I got baby tracked at work when I was in TV. Any woman was just, well, she's of childbearing age, don't promote her. And everybody knew it. One woman sued, and they ended up settling the lawsuit and moving her into a different job that was, not directly involved with the day-to-day production. It was completely sexist. They didn't want to pay mat leave.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then the management started adopting babies or having babies of their own. And then they left at 4:30 every day to pick up their kids. It was just so narcissistic. But this
Yeah.
idea that work and home life have to be completely separated from each other, I think is a big reason why there's so much anger.
Yeah.
Why there's this sense of defeatism and disposability in men, and this sense of raw anger in women, because men aren't allowed to say they want to be dads, that they don't want to work to live, that they don't want to live to work, they want to work to live. And the most important role in their life is being a father, and they'd like to see their kids grow up, please and thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Well,
so
I
they
mean, look at Japan, where they are facing. I have a coworker who's from Japan, and he's like, I didn't even want my kids to learn Japanese because I'm
Mhm.
convinced it's going to be a dead language in a few years
because of the birth rate.
because of the birth rate and because their whole society is just crumbling.
Yeah.
And part of that is because they normalized this work so much. The father is only there one day a week. He comes
Yeah.
home Sunday, and the younger generation was like, why would I bother
Yeah.
having kids? Why do I want men, especially, like, why would I want a wife to nag me
Well, I think
and
that
tell me
that's
to
why
do?
there's all that bonkers shit in anime,
Oh,
because they're
absolutely.
just like, the imagination's got to go somewhere.
Oh yeah. No, no, that's my theory as well. And you look at the Harajuku scene and just the Lolita fashion and the way they dress and everything. And it's a statement. And,
Yeah.
people, and that's why it bugged me. I think it was like Madonna or someone else who used the name. Oh, no, it was Gwen Stefani.
Gwen Stefani, the Harajuku thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, you have no idea why Harajuku is the way it is. You like this.
That was Gwen Stefani's sweet, and I don't think she meant anything by it, but nobody could do that today.
So it's
I mean, I think it was authentic. I think she really liked it, but that ages poorly.
Yeah.
And I like Gwen Stefani, so
for me.
But keep in mind, she also had a bindi, so she's sort of the queen of cultural appropriation.
I mean, for me, it's like if a celebrity goes somewhere and if a celebrity goes to India and they wear a bindi, I don't particularly care. I mean, I once had an Indian neighbor give me like the little stick-on jewel bindis because it's like she was sharing.
Oh, if you're doing it for a wedding or something like that, it's considered custom.
Yeah. And it's like I once saw, I talked before, I love Dita Von Teese, and I remember stumbling across again a Tumblr post where it's like all your faves are problematic, and one of the biggest ones they had for Dita Von Teese was she wore a bindi multiple times, and I'm
okay, but the third eye is not exclusive to Hinduism.
No, and it's the same thing where it's like people saying, oh, well, wearing braids is cultural appropriation, or wearing this or that.
Well, no, because Vikings had hair braiding too. And I mean, the Celtic circlets, the reason they dip down in the center like Wonder Woman's tiara is the third eye of wisdom. It's the eye of Minerva. Yeah.
There are so many concepts that are fairly ubiquitous across different societies.
Yeah.
And even like, I get the thing with saying the idea of the spirit animal is cultural appropriation as well, but at the same time, it's like, okay, if this is something a person believes that you have this thing, wouldn't that also mean that you believe that everyone has one, even if they're not necessarily from your culture?
It's funny because I know some people of indigenous backgrounds, and their rule for a cultural appropriation is if you're buying it, awesome, we'll take your money. If you're selling it, no, you don't get to call it native handicrafts. You don't have to you don't get to call it indigenous art. You're not indigenous. And it's like, you know what? That's a completely fair benchmark, because they're like, yeah, we want white people to buy our shit.
Exactly.
We're not going to buy our shit. We already have it. We're only going to make money if white people buy our stuff.
I remember reading an article from a therapist who said that kind of the idea of the spirit animal was something they used in sessions of helping.
No, it's archetype work. Yeah,
exactly. And they were told you can't do that, and it's like, okay, but this is actually helping people.
Well, it's also I knew someone who was in one of those smaller West African societies that were completely destroyed by slavery, and there's nothing left. There's no practitioners of the tradition left. The closest thing is, I believe it was Cree indigenous practice. And so that's what she did. So because it was the closest thing to what the little bits that were remembered of her culture. And my thought is, you can call that cultural appropriation all you want, but if people can't do that in that circumstance, they're left without a culture. And then you get people saying, oh, well, slavery doesn't count when it's, cultural appropriation. But the reality is, the only reason there is Black wealth in America right now is because the descendants of slaves managed to make a shit ton of money in things like fashion and entertainment, and they rediverted the wealth after Jim Crow and various other things took it away from them again and again. They just clawed back, found a product people wanted to buy, and sold sneakers and hip hop music to white suburban brats. And that's why we have New South Atlanta.
Pretty much.
It just, that couldn't have happened if they didn't find a way to get Whitey's money, so to speak, right? And so this kind of stuff has nuance, and that's why I don't like the talking points that come, you know, I don't like meme mental health, right? Like I post occasional inspirational phrases sometimes just because they're pretty. But this idea that people can do these daily affirmations and you know, oh, it's so mindful and all that stuff, unless you're really pulling apart these concepts and really working in it. That's what spirituality actually is. Getting down and actually struggling with these concepts. You know, that is what makes you grow. That is what gives you wisdom. That is the point. Not just going through the motions and, you know, repeating the words. You are supposed to question this stuff and your relationship to it. And that doesn't happen enough because everybody's so raised in. It's amazing to me how normalized everything is and how obsessed people are with being normal. Because I grew up with I grew up around a bunch of goths who we took pride in not being normal.
Yeah.
Right. The whole not being normal was our normal. And this intense fear of ostracization now, I really do think, you know, a lot of these people, and we talk about the lonely young man a lot, right?
Yeah.
But the reason men are so lonely is because women aren't going out. Right? I hear from people all the time, it's a sausage party at singles nights. Men might be lonely, but women are hiding. And of course they are. They've heard Me Too horror stories for how many years now, right?
Yeah.
Like the backfire effect has been really strong on that one.
Yeah.
And I called it back in the day. It was really unpopular, saying, can we not roll around in misery in this thing? Right? Like, and that I go back to the whole victimization thing versus, because, okay, being a victim is socially acceptable, right? This is the thing people don't get. Because if you're a victim, well, you can join a feminist group. You can hashtag Me Too. You can black pill. You can find a community. But if you actually want to heal, that means going through that rage. And the minute this was something I learned the hard way in PTSD therapy. Holy shit. The minute you get angry because you start going, ow, and you start going, this is not fair. Oh, you get so punished because people are so used to you being down and broken and sad and inert that when you start acting, they can't handle it. And it is a real issue. And people don't realize how they're doing it. It's things like, you know, you ever had that thing, you get upset with somebody, it's like, that's inappropriate, or don't yell at me. And, you know, you weren't really yelling. You were raising your voice maybe a little, or you were speaking emphatically.
Yeah.
I have a real problem with this because I did a ton of theater school. And one of the things they teach you is when you're nervous, speak louder. Because then you can be heard on stage. So the more nervous I get, the louder I speak. And so people think I'm yelling, and it's not. I'm just very nervous right now. Right.
Well, I remembered something. I think it was just yesterday. When I was 7 or 8, I got kicked out of the church choir because I couldn't sing quietly.
Really?
The church kids choir. Yeah.
That was definitely a white church.
Yes.
Yeah, because that wouldn't be a problem. That would be a problem with Black Southern Baptists.
It's interesting. Well, interestingly, I was thinking about it because, like, my mom loves Tina Turner, and so we've seen the Tina Turner movie many times.
Yeah.
And the exact same thing happens in the first scene of that movie, where it's like she won't stop singing like she's in a jive bar or whatever.
Right. Oh, that's a style thing. I mean, that's the other thing, right? Is there's a difference between projecting,
yeah,
which you're taught to do, right?
And style.
And yelling.
Yeah.
Like, just
And
because somebody is speaking loudly doesn't mean they're angry.
yeah. And so yeah,
And,
I was thinking about that. It's like, gee, I wonder why I have hangups.
yeah, I mean, geez, I mean, you sound like a you know, a case study in just every time you were seen, right? Every time you were visible, whether it was just angry or excited or something like that, you were squashed.
Yes.
Like
I
it was the
remember,
real children should be seen and not heard kind of thing.
well, there was another time when I was in third grade and I got into an argument with this one kid and I knew I was right. And I finally just screamed it. And it's like, okay, go sit down. Of course, I was the one who got in trouble. It's like, okay,
Yeah,
fine.
one of my more hilarious kid stories was there was this kid in it was third grade gifted, and he had an anxiety condition and he tended to blow up, but he was one of those kids, he blew up, he yelled, but he cried too. And there was one day they were picking on him right in class, and it was such a Disney Channel moment, right, where
Mhm.
the kid had a meltdown and ran out of the room, and I did that whole turn around, balled up fist, yelling at everybody saying, you should be nicer to him, he's a good person, and like that, and I run out of the room and ran after him. Of course I got in trouble. It's
Of
not, it
course.
doesn't work like it does in TV and movies. You are not rewarded for those moments. You are seen as disruptive. But
Yep.
I still stand by, I mean, it's funny in retrospect, right? It was so movie of the week.
It's also very you.
It was so very Disney Channel. Like, that's the thing. I was a quiet kid, but I guess I was always just sort of principled. And so I wouldn't do it for myself. But if I
Mhm.
felt strongly in an idea or I felt strongly about an issue, I'll step in front of that. I'll step in front. I'll take the hit. And it's not something I decided to do. It's something that was just sort of there. And people my whole life tried to squash it out of me. And, I've been labeled difficult and bitchy and not a team player. And I mean, I do think that if we could remove the word bitch
Mm.
from the English language, we'd be all better off. Not because it's like, oh, it's so offensive. It's just lazy, right?
Well, they'd find something else.
Well, and that's the thing, is that it doesn't it allows people to avoid engaging with what is really bothering them about the person, right? Like, okay, so somebody's tough and they're female. Are they unfair? All right, then your issue with them is not that they're bitchy, it's that they are unfair. That we can do something with,
Yeah.
you know?
At the same time, I think it is a symptom of the fact that language has just evolved so much in the last couple decades. The last 10 years
I'm
or so,
trying to think,
especially.
because I mean, I grew up in the decade of Eddie Murphy profanity, Richard Pryor, stuff
Mhm.
like that. And it was more clever. I go and read like Edgar Rice Burroughs or the pulps or something like that. And those were the shitty disposable fiction of their day. And they're so much better written.
Oh God, you're telling me.
But there is a lack of deep connection in the world today. And I think that's really what the core is. If
Yeah.
you're really angry, you're committed to something, and when you admit that you're angry, you're owning your feelings. And it's one of those things where the only way we make this better is if we actually create small groups and then bigger groups who allow people, stop and think, does this person have the right to be angry?
Mhm.
You know? And I mean, we handled it real badly with the whole Black Lives Matter uprising, right? Because I don't know how communities wouldn't get angry at that George Floyd video, right?
Yeah.
That's completely understandable. That people were like, no more. And then, Philando Castile and Breonna Taylor. I mean, some of those stories were just that young woman who got shot because a cop was doing a wellness check, didn't properly identify himself. She was babysitting her brother and she thought there was an intruder outside her house.
Mhm.
was that Tatiana? Oh, I forget her name,
I don't
but
remember that one.
Tatiana Jefferson. That was her
Mm.
name. Those stories are angering. And they say protest is the language of the unheard.
Mhm.
And it was real easy. Like, yes, watching Wendy's on fire every weekend, that scared people too.
Yeah.
And the way it got propagandized and the competing narratives, it was really, well, the competing narratives were doing exactly what they were intended to do, which is discredit the idea behind the very imperfect organizers of the protests.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the average person kind of settled somewhere in that they do believe that what happened to people like George Floyd and whatnot were wrong. I mean, and there's just so many that I could just be naming names for 20 minutes here.
Mhm.
And I think everybody agrees that it's wrong and we need to do something about it. But you just watched the support dwindle for Black Lives Matter because
As,
people didn't know how to handle the anger.
as it for me also, it was seeing the riots and the looting and the
Yeah,
burning and like
it was scary.
seeing photos of shops in the area where the riots were happening, where it's like, we're a small family owned business, please
Well, and that, I
don't
mean,
loot us.
yeah, we can get into the knock-on effects and the opportunism
Yeah.
that happened there. But I mean, I remember I did a documentary on hip hop.
Mhm.
Actually, award-winning documentary. But it was a ritual of every interview. I knew I was gonna go in and get chewed out by the performer because the station wasn't playing their music. And it was the same conversation every single time. And I knew they were right. And I was trying to get this music played, right? So I knew they were right. I saw the racism. And I was a white face that they could yell at. And so they did. And I took it. And then they did the interview. And I didn't take it personally because they had the right to be upset about that. They have the right to say, oh, you guys sure know when to find me when you want me to talk about being Black, but you won't play my record. That's fair to get pissed off about.
Yeah.
And that's why, I think the experience you had, the idea that you shouldn't have glared at the guy, you should have absolutely glared at the guy. That was the reasonable response.
Mhm.
That was the correct human thing to do. And most people, oh, customer service. And no, customer service does not mean taking abuse from customers.
Agree.
That should never be considered acceptable. It's not good customer service to reward the bad customers. And that's one thing I've really learned, that one of my over the holidays videos was about how to do things better, and I'm really big on rewarding good behavior, right? Coming through. Like, if we don't actively reward honorable behavior, we can't expect it. And the thing is that one of the things about rewarding honorable behavior is you cannot tolerate dishonorable behavior.
Mhm.
And that's where you start getting people being very squirrely because they're afraid they're going to be thrown out of things. And no, throwing someone out, and this is how far we've fallen, right? Because throwing someone out without having a conversation with them first is dishonorable. You don't do that. You're not understanding the concept here, right? But people are just so used to these weird Kafka-esque systems where one day you're just determined to be guilty of something and you're booted out without understanding what's going on. And I get it because, as a manager, I've had to have difficult conversations with people, and you always risk, when you're the one having the conversation, someone goes on Twitter and calls you abusive and all that stuff. And you know what happened, but you can't record private conversations legally in a lot of cases. So you're sort of screwed. It's your word against theirs.
Yeah.
And sometimes it sticks and sometimes it doesn't. And it's not fair, but that's life. And what seems to have gotten lost is that just because people believe something about you doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
And, you know, people have a hard time with that because of the consequences behind it. It's like, no matter what you do, there's consequences. There are consequences for inaction. And I think because so many people are just raised in the virtues of following the rules, that when they get into early adulthood, where all of a sudden everything's very subjective and you have to make decisions and there's no right or wrong answer, it's just, well, what pile of shit can I live with? Right? It gets hard and it gets tiring and you constantly feel like you're failing. And I think that's when people start pointing their anger at the wrong things. And why you get the really toxic influencers that we have. Now, I don't even like naming their names because the minute you name a name, their supporters freak out. And it just says something that you can't even say, you know, I said it before, so I'll say it again, that, you know, Jordan Peterson's wrong about chaos entities. You can't even say that without somebody losing their shit. And the reason I talk about Peterson and not some of the others who are much, much worse is because I actually think out of everybody, he's the least harmful. Like some of his ideas aren't new, they're not harmful. Some of the things he said has been downright daft, but in terms of people who are actually dangerous influences, I think he's one of the most benign.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Like I do think that I mean the thing about the all meat diet, that's unhealthy. Don't do that. Like that can make you very, very sick. But compared to some of these other people that are out there, you know, at least he's accredited, at least he knows a thing or two. There's a difference between being wrong and being what I believe to be an actual grifter.
A scam artist?
Yeah, I think some of these other people are, well, the thing is they flat out say they're scam artists. And people think they're being honest because they're doing it in plain sight, but they're scam artists. You know, they are just trying to fleece people for money and they will say anything to do that. And a really great way to get men to part with money is to promise them domination over women. And people get mad when I use that language, but let's face it, this isn't about attracting a loving partner.
No,
with these guys. It is domination. It is, you know, it's human
emotional manipulation.
It's emotional manipulation, and it's I mean, you read the pickup artist stuff is terrifying because it's based on actual psychology. The issue is it only attracts a certain type of person. And that's not going to set you up for a fulfilling relationship. These are damaged people.
Yeah, it's finding people who are already weak-willed, manipulating them to do what you want, and yet somehow you think they are going to give you strong, powerful sons.
Yeah, and even then, I don't think they're thinking that far ahead. I think
some of them talk about it.
Some of them talk about it, but what I find with, and I started on this before but didn't finish with the Manosphere stuff, they're not actually saying what they mean. They're not saying what they want. And it's funny because that's the criticism they have of women. Right. And this is, you know, women get angry and then it's treated as proof that women are bitches. Right. Because they say women say they want one thing, but they choose another. And that's what it's like reading these blogs. These guys talk about sex, 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 sex. What they really want is emotional support. And the tragic thing is if all they're talking about is sex, they're never going to get that emotional support because I don't know how to describe that yikes reaction that women get when a guy talks in a certain way.
God, it's,
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, and
there
that's
are,
exactly the kind of thing I was talking about, where it's like, oh, well, women just don't like what he's saying because he's right. No, there's a visceral reaction. Some women are just self-aware
well,
enough
it's
to know
a
why.
red flag, red flag, red flag, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
And I've seen otherwise decent guys, they start popping off and they say stuff and their vocabulary shifts, and it's like, yikes, get me out of here.
yeah.
You know, it don't, there are other words you could have used to say the exact same thing. And it's not about a sex drive. That's the other thing they don't understand. It's about seeming in control,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's about, are you actually enjoying the person, or are you a slave to your urges? And unfortunately, a stereotype about women is, out of control, hysterical, emotional, all that stuff.
Well,
And
there's a reason why a certain news article came out, and my response was Regina George has left the building.
oh yeah, yeah, I think bad actors use that. I mean, we've all seen female manipulators who know how to turn on the waterworks,
Oh
right?
yeah.
But that's the thing. No, there are some things that biochemically women respond physiologically differently. Like, women produce more oxytocin as a rule, not all.
Yeah.
And so women are more likely to cry to release strong emotions, stress, pain, anger, so on and so forth. Right. Um, but it's actually healthier than holding it all in, because that's one of the four, happy chemicals that allow you to feel better, allow you to actually process emotions. And if you can't do that, you have to do it by other means. And they don't, it working indirectly is difficult. And this is where we get into, well, how much is nature and how much is nurture? And, it's no less valid for someone to start crying because they're really, really angry as it
And
is. Sorry, go ahead.
I seem to recall reading that tears are your body's way of expelling
Yes.
when there's too many chemicals.
Yeah.
Your brain is producing too many chemicals and you have to get them out of the system.
Yeah.
So you're literally being overwhelmed.
Yeah. It's a
So it's
form
not a
of,
sign of weakness.
no, it's a form of waste management. And if you read the
Yeah.
Greek and Roman ethics, they cry all the time, you know? Uh,
Yeah.
but I'm going to bring up, you're talking before, my favorite Jane Austen movie of all
Nice.
time is the Ang Lee Sense and Sensibility, because of how they change the ending and Emma Thompson's ugly cry breakdown, interrupting Hugh Grant's speech, right?
Yeah.
And that it is a change. And this is why when people go, oh, they changed it. No, sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's fulfilling the spirit, if
And
not the letter.
and like here's the thing. One of the hardest things about Jane Austen to adapt is that they are very internal.
Yeah.
And like that's why my favorite part of pretty much any of her books is when someone finally writes a really long letter.
Right.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this is the part I'm here for. Like Darcy's letter to Elizabeth. I'm like, okay, now we're getting to the meat of things.
Right.
But it's like, especially a lot of Sense and Sensibility is focused on Eleanor and Eleanor's perspective. So it's like you get to see her journey through the whole thing.
But
Even
they do
as
it, yeah, because they don't OTP them right off the beginning in that version of the movie.
yeah, and in the book, it's like you could see exactly what was happening to Eleanor. So when it turned out that things worked out for her with Edward, it's you understood the elation. Whereas since in the movie she had to keep the stiff upper lip, which is absolutely what was happening
Yeah.
in the book, it's so now you understand it.
Yeah.
And you needed that big release of emotion in the movie because you didn't get to follow the emotion internally.
But you watch Emma Thompson's phases in that scene, and she's happy, so she's angry, and she's embarrassed, and she's angry again, and she's happy, but she's angry because she had to hold it in.
Yes.
And it's the letting it all out. And it's like the laughing and the grimacing and the crying and everything like that. And it's just, it's fantastic. It is Austen. It is
And
performed Austen. It's
yeah,
amazing.
and that's why she is one of the only people I trust to adapt Austen.
Well, because she wrote
Because
that, right? She won the Academy Award for the adapted screenplay, didn't she?
yes, and the
Yeah.
best part about that was her acceptance speech was written like a letter from Jane Austen.
Yeah.
And it was as if Austen had been there at the award ceremony
Mhm.
and she was describing it to her sister, complete with a line of did not run into Miss T, who,
Right.
something like basically a criticism like she didn't do my manuscript any justice.
Right.
And something else also ran into so and so, who I understand owes me a great deal of money.
Yeah.
And like it read like Austen, and it
Yeah.
was so cheeky and so well done that I'm like, that's one of the best acceptance speeches I've ever seen.
Well, and the
So
wonderful thing about Emma Thompson is she has no respect for those institutions.
yeah.
Her Oscars are in the bathroom.
Yes.
And, but she is so that is the best Austen I have ever seen because it understands it. And that to me, Austen has that slow burn female anger, that sense of unfairness at the world. And what do you do about it?
Yeah.
Right.
There is a 95 Persuasion that I quite enjoyed.
Yeah, you've mentioned that.
Um,
I think I've seen that one
yeah.
too. That was pretty good.
The other Sense and Sensibility is a BBC miniseries from 2007.
With Colin Firth, right?
No,
Oh no, that's another one.
that was a Pride and Prejudice, but no,
Oh, Pride.
2000,
Yeah, that's one.
yeah, 2007 Sense and Sensibility from BBC. I really enjoyed that because like they get to delve into it.
Yeah.
And they also like it literally opens with Willoughby seducing Colonel Brandon's ward,
Okay.
and like he's taking her dress off.
Oh wait, this is
And
sounding familiar.
I think I might have described it to
Yeah,
you
yeah,
at one point,
yeah.
but I do recommend that one because it's very well done.
Yeah, and I mean,
So
Austen's going to have to evolve because it's eventually going to become unrelatable. The fact that it's not now, I think it's become more relatable in the short term, right? Because nobody says what they mean anymore.
it, yeah,
Nobody says what they mean anymore. Everybody's my nonverbal cues.
I mean the idea of Austen having to evolve makes me so sad because
Well,
I'm
evolve
like,
doesn't mean change, right? It's all about
yeah,
how the material's presented instead of changing the core message of the material, because I think that idea of chafing against the system is never going to go away because there's always going to be some system.
well, I mean, look at Clueless from the 90s.
Yeah.
I think we'd all agree that that's probably the best adaptation there is of Emma.
Yes. I mean that's the thing, right? You can adapt it and not call it Emma or Persuasion or whatever. You can retell the story. But I do think, what Austen says about gender and the satire and subversion of gender, there's a lot that can be done with that and extrapolated on it and
Yeah.
shown through new lenses because I think as we're wont to do, we went all over the place, but everything's sort of linked together for a common theme. There is a masculine experience, there is a feminine experience, and
Mhm.
I think part of the reason that people are so walking around angry right now is that people don't know what it is. They know it's real, but they can't define it. And people are looking for answers. People want to know what to do. So many people are just like, please just tell me the right answer so somebody doesn't yell at me.
Yeah.
And the problem is that people are not simple. And so anything with people, there is no one right answer. And people don't like that answer. It's unsatisfying, but that's the best way I can. That's the most honest answer, right? I mean, there are just some types of people who they just can't stand me.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's true of anyone. The only difference with me is I not only accept it, I take it as a badge of pride when the right people are enraged by me. And that's not
Yeah.
because I'm trying to make people angry. It's just good. If they don't like what I'm saying, good.
There's also, just like I talked about before, you're never going to get everyone to like you. There's always going to be the Dita Von Teese quote. You could be the ripest, juiciest peach in the world, and there's always going to be someone who hates peaches.
Yeah.
And you need to learn that if you're a writer or an artist or even just a person, it's like, okay, if you can't please that person, cool. It's no real loss. Just move on
Well,
and find the people who do like you.
That's part of the reason I'm very careful about, do I just not like something or is it bad? And I'm not going to say something's bad if I don't like it. I'm certainly not going to judge it if I don't understand it. Right. And I am struggling. This is totally off topic, but it may be a funny place to close. I'm still struggling because I finally watched the Guardian of Christmas special. And that's relevant because Mantis actually gets angry in it and it's pretty awesome. But I just couldn't Chris Pratt. I knew it was going to be a problem, but it was worse than I thought. And I have been actually sitting with what about the guy drives me so crazy, because this is very rare for me. I can normally find something about anybody working in entertainment to respect, even if I don't necessarily care for their work.
Yeah.
But he just, and I think a big part of it is he's miscast. That is not how I see Star-Lord. That's not how Star-Lord's written on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, the perfect Star-Lord is Bradley Cooper and he's Rocket Raccoon. Like, that's how I see Star-Lord, right? And I think maybe that was a product of a time where you needed that high Q score leading man to be in a movie, because that was James Gunn's big breakout role.
Yeah, well, it's like I remember James Gunn talking about how like he had chosen Chris Pratt before they were even sure if it would be possible.
Okay.
So he'd pretty much written it for Chris Pratt.
Yeah, and I think that part of it is Chris Pratt has become a cartoon of Chris Pratt. Ryan Reynolds slips into this sometimes. He did it in Free Guy.
Yeah.
It was just too much persona.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's a lovely guy, and if I met him in person, it'd be a great chat. So it's, the persona of Chris Pratt that I'm reacting to, not but I also realize that he's the kind of guy who tends to make shitty comments about me. That is the kind of guy, that particular look, the nice guy with the puppy dog eyes and a little bit of beard stubble. He's the one where every third phrase just has this undertone of, I want to tell her, bitch, make me a sandwich.
He's very basic.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
and very,
like you said,
normal.
I'm sure he's perfectly nice. It's just there's something about him where it's like, it's the humor, it's the attitude, it's the
package. It's the whole package.
Yeah.
And it is just that is the type of guy I tend to have a problem with, because they say something ignorant, and then when I go, oh, do fuck off, they play the victim.
Yeah.
Oh, come on, that whole thing, just makes me see red. And that's the thing, it's not him, right? Yeah. And so I know that he's probably a lovely person. And again, if I actually knew him, I'd probably have a completely different feeling about him. But the characters he plays, because let's face it, it's essentially the same type of dude in Jurassic World, in the Jurassic films.
Yeah.
And that kind of guy, just those are the guys I tend to have problems with. And so I totally understand when people prejudge. And the difference there is, I'm saying, yeah, I probably could meet some people who present that way at first, and then there's more to them, and I can find a way to at least respect them, if not be besties with them. And that's something you can only do if you accept your feelings and validate your feelings so you can feel your feelings. And if you're so afraid of anger that you can't admit you're angry, you can't do that. And
because sometimes you you have to sit with that anger and
Yeah.
not revel in it. Just go, okay, what is this? Why is this? Where does this come from? And I mean, part of why I wanted to talk about this whole thing was because I knew by the time we were done, I would feel so much better.
Oh, good. Well, yeah,
Which I do.
you need to talk about it. I mean, even just there's power in someone saying that experience was bullshit.
Yeah.
You know, like just no, that guy was in the wrong.
Yeah. So it's just been a couple weeks of things piling up and then finally having a name for it and finally understanding things. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, now I can address this.
Well, I
But
think we really need to rename it the holidays because it's just a different kind of work. Like people should be able to take 2 or 3 days off after New Year's because oh my, it's not the holidays, it's the winter time.
yeah, like this whole past week, I've just been like, why is anyone doing anything? We should all just be sleeping.
Oh, I've not been working per se. I am exhausted. I'm like, where have the days gone?
Yeah.
And I mean, part of it's been catching up on cleaning. But like I actually dusted my office and that took an entire day because I had to move all the stuff. But like, oh my God, where has the time gone? It's just like the week's over.
Yeah.
And
I had all this time. You had pre-recorded and you were gonna relax. And
yeah.
oh
And
no, wait.
I did a
It's over.
little, but not nearly as much as I hoped. And this is gonna run like 3 weeks after we've recorded. So people are like, wow, this is really dated. But yeah, that's how we roll. We just let it
Whoops.
go and then put it into digestible chunks. So I guess we should stop chunking for the time being. This has been Two Women Talking. I'm Leanna Kersner with Song W. Erickson. I'm doing bunch of stuff. Check out the bubbles and our workshops. Yeah, we'll probably have something to announce by the time this runs. Song, what you got coming up?
Well, by the time this comes up, I hope I'll be promoting volume 1.
Hey, okay.
So,
yeah, I'm looking forward to that coming out.
yes.
The subtitle art, the pages inside are beautiful that you did.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
they're
you.
really, really nice. Simple but elegant, like an old woodcut insert.
Yeah. Well, I used to read the old Wizard of Oz books when I was a kid.
Yeah.
They had just that beautiful Art Nouveau, Art Deco. Design.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it just
that was kind of my inspiration.
It's the thing they don't do with most books now because it costs money.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad. All right, everybody. This has been Two Women Talking. Thanks for watching.